Okay, folks, so the session will be recorded. So for those that are maybe late to joining, the recording will be available afterwards. We'll be sharing our YouTube channel and we'll be sharing that link with you. I might as well just make a start. How does everyone feel about that? Ready to crack on? Yeah, wonderful. Well, good afternoon and welcome to the first webinar in our Accessibility Masterclass series, folks, at UserVision. My name is Keith and I'm joined by multiple colleagues from UserVision, but the most important one for today is Snigdha, my colleague in the accessibility team. Today's topic is about accommodating neurodiverse users online. So it'll be about understanding the challenges faced by neurodivergent individuals, how to overcome these challenges, and embracing neurodiversity to create truly inclusive online experiences. Now, before we begin, I'd just like to ask you to, if you've got any questions at all, we will be having a Q&A session at the very end. But if any questions come up into your head during the session, please just pop them into the chat and we'll address those later on. And if we don't have enough time to address them all at once, then we will make sure to email you all with an answer to all of the questions that you have. Okay. Now, before we start, I just want to do a quick poll, folks. Does your organisation support the needs of neurodiverse individuals? There's a poll in the chat there, folks. If you could just fill that in for me, that'd be wonderful. Okay. Okay, so we're seeing a lot of yes responses, which is absolutely fantastic to see. We've got a couple of no responses, and we've also got some occasionally responses. So for those that are saying no or occasionally, hopefully this webinar will provide you with the tools and tips that you need to enable neurodiverse users to interact and engage with your digital services. Wonderful. So here we have a quote from Ben Schneiderman, who is a renowned computer scientist and professor who has long championed the cause of accessibility and technology. His principles in human-computer interaction emphasize the importance of designing systems that are intuitive, efficient, and accessible to all users, regardless of their abilities. So this quote really emphasizes the importance of inclusive design in technology and the necessity to consider factors that foster inclusivity across diverse demographics, including people with varying ages, levels of experience, and abilities as well. Where it mentions disabled individuals, these are commonly categorized into 4 groups of impairments in terms of accessibility. And these are visual impairments, auditory impairments, motor impairments, and cognitive disabilities. Okay. National statistics suggest that 1 in 5 people have registered disability that limits their daily activities, which really underlines the importance of designing and catering to all users. Inaccessible services create barriers that effectively lock disabled people out of being able to complete tasks independently. And not only do organisations have a moral obligation to make their services accessible, there's also a legal obligation for public sector organisations in the UK to comply with, as well as legislation in the EU for organisations that trade within the EU. Okay, I'm not going to go into too much detail there, but I just want you to bear that in mind as we're going through this. I know we've got a lot of people on the call from various education sectors and public sectors and private sectors as well. So with that in mind, why are we focusing on one disability group? And that's where I'm going to hand over to my colleague Snigdha.
So as Keith mentioned, we have multiple people out there who have access requirements, yet here we are focusing on just the one. So why is that? Well, so when discussing accessibility, people often think about the more visible disabilities, such as visual or motor impairments. And some of the high-level considerations include designing for assistive technology users, such as users navigating with a screen reader, or maybe users who are not navigating with a mouse, they're using a keyboard, joystick, voice control software, and so on. I'm not saying this is a bad thing, mind you. You absolutely do have to consider all these accommodations. However, these do not encompass the entire gamut of disabilities. So not all disabilities result in physical impairments. Users with cognitive disabilities do need to be accounted for when designing accessible experiences. This is often not the case, which is why we're focusing on just this group today. So let's start off with a brief introduction to cognitive disabilities. What are cognitive disabilities? They're a group of conditions that affect an individual's ability to process information, think, reason, and learn. To put it simply, it's to do with how the brain processes things. So to gain an insight into how cognitive disabilities could affect users on the web, it's worth understanding some of the different types of cognitive disabilities and impairments. And there are various disabilities that need to be accounted for, each affecting users in different ways. So we have learning disabilities. These are difficulties in the areas of reading, writing, maths, and organizational skills. And these can include dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and executive functioning disorder. We have autism spectrum disorder, and individuals with autism may have difficulty with social skills, language and communication, repetitive behaviors, and they may exhibit restricted interests. You have ADHD, so attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and this affects a person's ability to pay attention, control impulsive behaviors, and regulate hyperactivity. It may result in difficulties with organizing and completing tasks, following instructions, staying focused, and managing time and impulses. Then you have intellectual disabilities, which are characterized by limitations in intellectual functioning, such as learning, problem solving, communication, and social skills. Then you have sensory processing disorder. So these are difficulties with how the brain processes information received through the senses, such as sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell. So it could be individuals who are particularly sensitive to light, individuals who are affected with loud sounds. All of these come under the broader category of sensory processing disorder. And finally, we have cognitive impairment due to aging. So this refers to a decline in cognitive abilities that occur as a natural part of the aging process. It may involve difficulties with memory, attention, problem solving, and other cognitive functions. And it includes medical conditions like Alzheimer's and dementia. So just as digital accessibility should encompass more than just visual, auditory, or motor impairments, designing for cognitive disabilities too should consider a broader range of conditions. It's essential to remember that cognitive disabilities vary widely in their nature and severity, and each person's experience is unique. The same disability may present itself differently in different individuals. However, as we just saw, there are numerous conditions out there, and they all vary greatly. So to make it a little easier, we can break down these conditions down into tasks that users may have problems with. So these tasks can include difficulty with understanding instructions, remembering information, interacting with others, managing time, and making decisions. Categorizing these into different areas of difficulties can help understand the spectrum a bit better instead of going and trying to find out more about each and every disability out there. And I'm going to start off, I'll go over some interesting statistics here. Now, Keith mentioned 1 in 5 users, 1 in 5 people have some sort of disability. Now, 1 in 10 people have some sort of cognitive disability. That's 10% of the global population. 1 in 10 people, that's not a small number. So to break it down even further, approximately 2.16% of adults in the UK have a learning disability. Around 1% of the population of the UK are on the autism spectrum. An estimated 850,000 people are living with dementia in the UK. And again, with an aging population, this number is expected to rise to over 1 million by 2030. Around 1 million people in the UK live with traumatic brain injuries, which can be caused by falls and accidents. So, as evidenced by these numbers, cognitive disabilities affect a significant proportion of the population. Also note that these numbers will be much higher because cognitive disabilities, since they tend to be invisible, they often go undiagnosed and are underreported. There are many adults out there who have never been tested. Testing was not conducted as effectively earlier, which has now resulted in many adults going through life without being aware of possible cognitive issues. And the point I'm making here is that accommodating cognitive disabilities will ensure a better experience for a very large number of people, a lot more than just 10%, which again was already a sizable number to begin with. Okay, but what about neurodiversity? That is what the talk is titled after all. So far, I've been using the term cognitive disabilities rather liberally. It can be seen as an umbrella term, but it's probably not the most inclusive when talking about serving the widest range of people. And this brings us to neurodiversity. In its essence, neurodiversity refers to the fact that all of our brains are unique, just like fingerprints. And some brains process things a bit differently to others. So neurodiversity includes different conditions and cognitive variations, such as the ones we saw earlier, ADHD, autism, learning differences, but it also goes beyond these diagnosed medical conditions. So to emphasize, neurodiversity, it's more than just a politically correct term. Cognitive disabilities are often looked at through a medical lens that focuses on deficits, impairments, disabilities. However, the neurodiversity paradigm reframes these differences as individual differences in ability, not disorders. It's an inclusive term that recognizes and embraces the diverse ways in which individuals' brains and cognitive abilities can vary. And to emphasize this, here's a quote from not George Orwell, not from Animal Farm. All brains are different, but some process things a bit differently than others. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Keith to look at some new problems neurodivergent users might face online.
Remember to unmute. Thank you very much, Nigda. So we're going to be looking at the common problems faced by users online. So neurodiverse users can face multiple challenges when using and interacting with websites, apps, software, and digital content. These challenges range from design barriers to complex language to lack of accessibility features. And this can limit their opportunities for online learning, communication, social participation, and access to information, which are increasingly critical in today's digital society. The internet offers valuable access to information, education, entertainment, and skill-building opportunities. Yet, if these resources are inaccessible, their potential benefits may be lost to those who need them the most. Let's look at the following examples. First off, folks, we have CAPTCHAs. Now, this is an acronym I know what a CAPTCHA is, but the acronym itself is completely automated public Turing test to tell computers and humans apart. Now, that was a nice little nugget for me this session. CAPTCHAs are security mechanisms to distinguish human users from bots. However, users with cognitive disabilities, such as learning difficulties, may struggle to process past them and proceed past them. For instance, some CAPTCHAs require users to recognize patterns in the instance of the example on the left-hand side there, recall information, perform mathematical calculations, or make decisions. They may also implement inaccessible design features such as small fonts, low contrast, complex visual layouts, and garbled audio. Okay, so all in all, folks, these are generally quite inaccessible patterns, which will inhibit the users getting past this first stage. Okay. Captions. Videos relying on auditory and visual formats to present information may be difficult to process for some users with cognitive disabilities. For instance, those with cognitive processing difficulties may find videos easier to understand when there are visual representations of the spoken words. Captions can improve information retention and help users to focus better. If captions are not available, users with cognitive disabilities may struggle to comprehend the content presented in the video. So users may also experience difficulty in maintaining focus as they rely solely on auditory cues to grasp the content. Next one we're looking at here, folks, is cluttered content. Now, it's generally not best design practice or inclusive design practice to have cluttered content like this, but here we have a couple of examples from Craigslist and from Arngren as well. Some websites and apps may implement loud graphics and cluttered content as a stylistic choice. Not only could this affect the user experience of the site, but these choices could also make the service inaccessible for users with cognitive difficulties. Cluttered content can be visually distracting, making it challenging to locate or navigate to relevant information. The readability is lowered, which increases cognitive fatigue and make for an overwhelming, frustrating, and confusing experience for users with disabilities like dyslexia or ADHD. If you'd like to see how this might look for someone with dyslexia or ADHD, there's actually a browser extension available called Funkify, which is designed to simulate a range of cognitive impairments, offering users a first-hand glimpse of the challenges faced by users living with these types of impairments. But it's also important to acknowledge that tools like Funkify can only offer a partial understanding and can't truly grasp the full extent of what it's like for neurodivergent individuals who live with cognitive impairments. The next example we're looking at, folks, is timeouts. Okay, so neurodivergent individuals often require additional time to process information and execute tasks effectively. Time limits, particularly when imposed on complex tasks or those involving multiple steps, can pose significant challenges for them. These constraints may increase stress and anxiety, hindering their ability to comprehend instructions and complete tasks within the allotted time frame. And moreover, interruptions such as timeouts can disrupt the flow of their work, leading to frustration and confusion. And these interruptions may cause neurodivergent individuals to lose track of their progress or forget critical details, potentially resulting in the loss of data or work. Thankfully, WCAG helps overcome some of these challenges. I've got another poll for you folks. If you could please complete the poll for me. To what extent are you familiar with WCAG? I'm just going to complete it myself there. Go. We've got very aware here, folks. That's wonderful. Somewhat aware and not at all aware. So I'm going to briefly touch on what WCAG is in this following section, and I'll hopefully give you a better understanding. So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are a set of guidelines developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, and they provide recommendations for making the web more accessible for people with disabilities, including cognitive disabilities. For those, again, that are unaware of what WCAG is and does, they are the de facto standard in web accessibility, folks, internationally recognized, as it's been developed by the people that develop HTML and CSS specifications. We're currently on the latest version, which is WCAG 2.2, released in October 23, so it's quite recent. So there's new content in there that we need to familiarize ourselves with. It's broken into 4 principles, which are, generally speaking, center around the user's ability to interact, engage, and understand the content that they're presented with. These principles are further broken down into guidelines and then further broken down into testable success criteria, which are essentially checkboxes, which give developers and content producers guidance on how to make their content as accessible as possible. And finally, on WCAG, there are 3 levels of compliance. There's level A compliance, which is the lowest level of compliance. We've got level AA, which is the minimum for the likes of your public sector organisations, the likes of anyone that's trading in the EU to comply with the European Accessibility Act. And finally, we have AAA, okay, which is the highest level and most enhanced level of compliance, okay? In order to meet level AA compliance, you need to meet all of level A's criteria first and then all of AA, and to comply with level AAA, you need to meet all of the success criteria, so that's 86 in total. But in order to pass AA, we're setting at 55 to do that. The reason I'm mentioning this, folks, is to note that many organisations do have this legal requirement to meet level AA, and often the success criteria from level AAA are often overlooked because they're perceived as an unattainably high standard. Okay. These guidelines offer guidance for visual, auditory, motor, and cognitive impairments. And the reason we're talking about it today is because several of these success criteria benefit people with cognitive impairments, such as guidelines related to content formatting, predictability, language, and alternative formats. So let's have a look at these. in more detail. Firstly, we have solid structure. So solid structure on websites refers to the organization and arrangement of content, navigation, and elements on the page, which are presented in a clear, logical, and user-friendly manner, which enables neurodivergent individuals to navigate and comprehend the information more easily. This structured approach promotes wayfinding, which involves the use of content design and layout, helping users to find what they need efficiently. Also helps them to understand the content clearly and engage with the website more effectively. This is similar to how people navigate in the real world, making use of aspects like landmarks, colours, and signs. So we've listed a few WCAG success criteria that relate to solid structure. Now, in our accessibility training courses, we really do take a deep dive into each of them and of what they mean, what you need to do to actually comply with these. However, we're just going to touch on them and mention them today just to save some time. Okay. So sorry, I'll go back to that last one. The success criteria that relate to providing a solid structure for users are meaningful sequence, identify input purpose, link purpose, and headings. We also have one final one, which is section headings, which is a AAA requirement, which is one of the ones that's often overlooked, as I mentioned previously. The next section, folks, is predictable content. Now, consistency and predictability in website content are crucial for supporting neurodivergent individuals. We've seen this time and time again when we've been conducting usability testing with these individuals as well. By maintaining a uniform structure and ensuring the functional elements behave predictably across web pages, we help individuals with cognitive limitations navigate more easily. When content is presented consistently, it reduces confusion that prevents disorientation, especially for those that may struggle with processing changes or get easily distracted by unexpected alterations in context. And the following WCAG success criteria fosters a smoother and more accessible browsing experience for all users, including our neurodivergent users. And these include on focus, on input, consistent navigation, and consistent identification. All the 3.2s for those that are clued up on WCAG. Wonderful. The next set of WCAG success criteria that help neurodiverse users to effectively interact with digital content is the Input Assistance Guidelines, which covers guidance relating to providing clear instructions to users, preventing possible errors, and providing users with clear feedback to recover from potential mistakes. By providing clear instructions, digital authors can empower neurodiverse users to navigate and interact with digital interfaces more effectively. And this includes offering concise and straightforward guidance on how to use features, complete tasks, or input information. Clear instructions help users with cognitive differences understand what is expected of them and how to proceed, which reduces confusion and frustration. And some of these include error identification, labels and instructions, error suggestion, and finally, we've got AAA success criteria, error prevention as well. So not only are alternative formats for providing digital content necessary for users with visual, motor, and auditory impairments, they also help users who prefer or require these formats. So, for example, for visual learners, images serve as powerful tools for comprehension and retention. And they provide concrete visual representations and can enhance understanding, reinforce concepts, and stimulate memory recall. Similarly, for auditory learners, neurodivergent individuals benefit from clear verbal explanations and auditory cues. And likewise, for your reading and writing learners among neurodivergent individuals, written text serves as a vital means of comprehension and retention. And that's why providing alternative formats to help all users engage with your content is so important. So here we've got a number of success criteria listed, which includes non-text content, audio only and video only, captions that are pre-recorded, information and relationships, and text spacing. The final set of WCAG success criteria that help neurodiverse users engage with digital content relate to providing sufficient time and user control. In situations where time limits are essential, additional assistance must be given to accommodate users' needs. Implementing time-based restrictions on content and interactive forms may induce stress for users, particularly those who require additional time to comprehend and digest information. Furthermore, users should have the capability to pause or hide content that could impact their processing time as well. So there's just the two WCAG success criteria we have here, folks, which are timing adjustable and pause, stop, hide. I'll pass back to Snigdha.
Thank you, Keith. So as Keith mentioned, there is legislation that states that digital content needs to be compliant against the guidelines laid out by WCAG 2.2 to level AA. This is a step in the right direction since these guidelines do encompass solutions for a vast variety of accessibility as well as usability issues that users often encounter online. However, this may not be enough for users with cognitive disabilities. So a lot of criteria related to cognitive impairments are marked as level AAA. This means that organizations are not legally bound to achieve these standards. Indeed, many people don't even see this as an achievable standard. Additionally, neurodivergent users often have diverse needs, preferences, and abilities. A one-size-fits-all approach, as suggested by some WCAG guidelines, might not be sufficient to cater to the individual requirements of this user group. Furthermore, while WCAG compliance is meant to help all users, it can feel like the guidelines are built for people whose disabilities are a more integral part of their identity. What about people who don't view the way their brain processes things as something that shapes them? So this is also part of why we need to shift the neurodiversity paradigm. Therefore, while being WCAG compliant does significantly help users with disabilities access digital content, truly creating an accessible experience involves going beyond the recommended guidelines. And these are not drastic changes that will affect the aesthetic presentation and the functionality of your websites. Accounting for these changes helps create a better experience for all users, not just neurodivergent users or specific users from the disabled community, but all users. And with that, let's look at some of the factors that need to be considered. So, fonts and typeface. The choice of font used on a web page can affect the readability of the text. The font typeface, letter spacing, line height, and styling can all have an impact on how users perceive digital content. So some aspects to be mindful of. In general, sans serif fonts are easier to read on a page. These are fonts without the small decorative strokes or teals at the end of the characters. So content appears to be cleaner with distinctive shapes and wider openings since the letters tend to be less crowded. It's also why individuals with dyslexia prefer sans serif fonts like Arial, Verdana, and Calibri. And that's what's shown on the slide here. Fortunately, this doesn't mean that websites need to completely reinvent themselves, although I'm sure all designers would love to have their websites completely coded in Comic Sans, best font ever. Various tools and software are available to individuals, allowing them to modify the presentation of content based on their personal preferences. So these include font modifiers that allow users to view the site in their preferred font, and plugins that can increase the size between letters and lines. However, what organizations do need to be mindful of is that the site should allow users to customize this content according to their needs. That is, digital interfaces need to provide this freedom and flexibility to users to make their own changes. And not only that, but sites also need to ensure that these user-implemented changes doesn't affect the actual content of the page. Content shouldn't be hidden because it doesn't fit within a container or because different components are obscuring each other because they're now presented in a different font or because the size is bigger. So this involves ensuring that responsive design has been implemented correctly. And on this slide, we have text written in what's called the open dyslexic font. So for users with dyslexia, reading can be difficult since letters may appear flipped or swapped with adjacent letters. So continuous research is being conducted to create a font that enhances readability for individuals facing reading challenges. So Open Dyslexic, which is on the slide here, is one such font And what this does is it employs the concept that heavily weighted bottoms for letters aid in understanding the direction of the alphabet. So as you can see, the words have a heavier stroke at the bottom, so they're a little thicker at the bottom, and this can help prevent letters from appearing flipped or from moving around. So this is one font that quite a few users implement to and change the context on site just to make things easier to read for themselves. So again, this doesn't mean that sites need to present their content in these fonts. However, ensure that the content is responsive so that it isn't affected if users apply their own modifications. So moving on to the next factor, paragraph and line spacing. And we have Goldilocks and the 3 bears of line spacing here. So it's not just fonts that can affect readability. The way content is visually laid out and presented can also influence the experience of users. So while I did mention that users can modify content according to their preferences, the goal is always to be accessible and user-friendly by default. Because applying modifiers, plugins, extensions, they do require effort from the user, and that's something we want to minimize as much as possible. So it's essential that there's appropriate paragraph and line spacing on text, so for neurodivergent users, since it can affect the readability and comprehension. Adequate spacing, and that refers to the vertical distance between lines of text, ensures that letters do not crowd together. And this reduces the risk of words blending together or letters getting misinterpreted. Proper paragraph spacing, so that's the space between paragraphs of text, blocks of text, allows for better visual separation, making it easier for these users to distinguish one idea from another. It prevents overwhelming clusters of words and also helps individuals with attention challenges focus on one section at a time, reducing cognitive load and improving overall comprehension. That being said, too much line spacing can also be problematic because then the flow of content and how it relates to each other can be affected. Like I mentioned before, paragraph spacing helps separate ideas, but when there's too much, it can affect your flow of thought. Therefore, not too much, not too little, but just right, just like the baby bear in Goldilocks. So moving along to text alignment and presentation. So at a glance, there are 2 blocks of text present here. At a glance, which one seems easier to read? All right, so this was not a trick question. That is a correct answer, and I really hope you said it's the one on the left. Okay. So look at the alignment, the spacing, the use of colors, and the heading text. These are all things that contribute to better readability and also being able to scan through content quickly without having to read each and every word. And this is something that sites do need to implement because users often rely on visual cues to navigate content, and consistent alignment helps them understand the structure and organization of the information presented. Proper alignment and presentation maintains a consistent and predictable visual layout throughout a site. So some factors to consider. Left-aligned text promotes readability, especially for users with cognitive difficulties, because it provides consistency, a clear visual structure, and a guided reading path. It reduces cognitive load, avoids visual obstacles, and facilitates easier comprehension and accessibility. It is common knowledge that right-line text isn't the easiest to read just because you're not sure where to start the sentence. But even center-aligned and justified text can be problematic because you don't have the ragged edges on the right, which means that it doesn't support the flow of your eyes as easily, which can affect readability. So the use of color can also greatly benefit users with cognitive differences by improving their comprehension, engagement, and overall experience. Using colors to organize information, supplement content, and emphasize text can help users with attention, memory, or processing challenges. At the same time, it shouldn't be overdone, so not too much color, don't have text completely in capital letters because that looks like you're screaming at your users. Overusing bold or italics can then detract from the actual importance of the text. So use it effectively. White space creates a visual distinction between different elements on a web page, such as paragraphs, headings, and images. So as we saw earlier with paragraph and line spacing, this separation helps users identify and focus on individual pieces of content without feeling overwhelmed by a cluttered layout. And another thing to take into account is the F-shaped pattern of reading. So the way sighted users scan a page often follows an F shape, and that's demonstrated by this image on the right here. So users generally read the first line, move down, read part of the second line, and then just scan the rest of the page in a vertical movement. So thus, the first line on a page receives the most scrutiny, and the initial words on the left side of each line of text attracts more attention than the following words on the same line. So to aid this, place crucial information in the first line, categorize content using headings and subheadings so that when you're scanning through a page quickly, you know exactly what to look for to find the information that you need. Visually group related content using whitespace and containers so that blocks of text and separate ideas are distinct from each other. And another thing is to break content into bulleted lists because, again, this helps for readability. Now, this is true for most users. I'm sure we all benefit from content being presented like this, but it's especially true for users with reading and attention difficulties. When large paragraphs with multiple words in a line are presented, users are more likely to miss out on relevant information since it can be overwhelming. So, moving on to zebra stripes for tables. So zebra stripes, or alternating row colors, improve readability by creating visual separation between rows. This aids in data comprehension. So this design technique enhances the user experience, particularly for individuals with cognitive difficulties, by guiding the eye along each row and providing a sense of structure and consistency in the presentation of data. So this alternate striping, it also helps prevent users from accidentally skipping rows while reading or entering data, because especially if your table is very big, by the time you reach the last cell, it can be difficult to identify where you currently started with. But when you have colors, it helps you categorize this a bit better and identify which cell corresponds to which row and which column. And that's demonstrated by this equality, diversity, and inclusion study for Middle Earth. So the colors over here, the zebra stripes, it helps categorize information a bit better. So moving on to language and tone. An accessible experience involves using simple language that can be easily understood by a diverse audience. And some factors to consider are avoid using jargon, complex vocabulary, and long sentences and unfamiliar abbreviations, since again, it affects the understandability of the content. Not just this, the choice of words used as well as the tone of communication can impact readability. And some features regarding phraseology to consider are using direct communication where possible. So addressing users using you statements. So you do this, you do that, fosters a sense of connection and inclusivity. It makes the content feel more personalized and engaging, which can lead to better comprehension and retention. Using the active voice in writing makes sentences clearer and more straightforward to understand. So do this as opposed to this should be done. So some neurodivergent users often prefer the structure since it emphasizes the action and who is doing it. And this reduces ambiguity when following instructions. Using verbs for for calls to action. Clear and action-oriented language using verbs for these calls can ensure that users know what step to take next. And this clarity encourages engagement and interaction with the content. So having specific calls to action using verbs like submit form to complete this application. For instructions, using if-then sentences can be helpful. So since these offer a clear and predictable structure for processing information, it makes it a cause and effect relationship, which can help comprehension, decision making, and problem solving. So I understand this is quite a bit of information, so let's look at some specific examples to make this just a bit clearer. So the first one, avoid using complex language. We have the sentence, utilize the multifaceted parameters to elucidate the nuances of the subject matter. It's a lot, hard to understand. Instead, if you just said, consider different aspects to understand the details of the topic, it immediately makes it a lot easier to understand. Using direct communication. It is recommended that one should assess the feasibility prior to making a decision. It's okay, the sentence is fine. However, if it's rephrased to, you should assess if this is feasible before proceeding, it encourages, it makes it a bit more engaging. It encourages interaction with whatever the site is supposed to do. Using active voice. The report should be reviewed by the team before it's submitted. The team should review the report before submitting it. So this is, there's more emphasis on who is doing this action and what it is, which again can make things clearer. Using verbs for call to action. An evaluation of the situation is necessary. Instead, just say evaluate the situation. And it seems like a minor change. There isn't much of a difference between an evaluation and evaluate. But just making sure you're using a verb for this call to action can make it seem more engaging and more pertinent to the task at hand. And finally, using if-then sentences. You might encounter difficulties if you don't follow the procedure. Rephrase it to use an if and a then. So if you don't follow the procedure, then you might encounter difficulties. This makes it a little clearer to understand. Moving on to images and emojis. So images can aid with understanding and processing information quicker. So for users who benefit from visual learning or who have difficulty processing textual information, images and diagrams can be helpful in providing instructions. So for instance, take assembling furniture from IKEA. While building furniture together it's either a great bonding exercise or it's a real test of your relationship. More often than not, these instructions with images are extremely helpful. So we have this image on the left. Let's see what the same thing might look like with just text. A lot of text, a lot of instructions. So it's probably not the most helpful to many users out there. Emojis and icons function in a similar manner to standard images, where they can help users better understand the thoughts being communicated. Emojis can be very helpful since text-based content may not always capture the tone the content was originally written in. This also benefits neurodivergent users who may struggle with social cues. Emojis can provide a clear and explicit representation of emotions. So sarcasm, for instance, doesn't always translate well to text, but can be easier to interpret with an emoji. So I love when I have to read something 4 times over to understand it. It's easy to understand that I'm being sarcastic based on my tone, but on text, it might not translate as well. But you have a little rolling eyes emoji. It makes things a bit easier to understand. And finally, mental health. And this is another factor that needs to be considered when designing digital content. So for some users, unfamiliar layouts, unpredictable navigation, and overwhelming content can be a cause of anxiety. So when it comes to the content itself, certain triggering themes or language could be upsetting for users. And this can discourage users from engaging with the platform entirely. There are different things to consider when accounting for mental health online. So ensuring consistent layouts, implementing simple navigation, provide contacts with assistance, provide trigger warnings if necessary. So if you have sensitive content which might affect users, just letting users know in advance that these themes are going to be dealt with within the text. And finally, using inclusive language so that nobody feels left out. So you've seen some of the different criteria that organizations need to account for. And again, it is important to be accessible by default by trying to implement as many of these changes, as many of these features as possible. It's also important to accommodate different tools and software that people may use. So some of these are font modifiers. So as we saw earlier, individuals might change the font in which content is presented in to make it easier for them to read. Color modifiers so users can change the color that the content is presented in. So this can include high contrast mode and dark mode. Text-spacing bookmarklets increase the size of the letters and the spacing between individual alphabets as well as the lines. Speech recognition software. So some users might find it easier to dictate instead of typing. And it's not just speech to text, but some software also lets users control the entire interface using their voice instead of with a mouse or a keyboard. So users can say, click here, scroll down, instead of having to navigate with the physical hardware. Text-to-speech software, again, some users might find it easier to process auditory information, and the software can dictate what's on the screen. And image and animation concealers. So for some individuals, images and animations can be distracting from the content on the screen, and they may choose to hide it completely. Care should be taken to ensure that the content is still understandable without the graphics. And that brings us to the closing section of this webinar. So again, thank you for joining us today. This is something I'm very passionate about, and I'm glad I got to share some of my knowledge with you. So just to summarize what we've gone over so far, acknowledge that there's more to accessibility than visible disabilities. Understand the challenges faced by neurodivergent individuals. Ensure that your products and services are WCAG compliant. At the same time, recognize the limitations of WCAG and why it's important to go beyond the guidelines. Allow for user customization and flexibility. So remember, everyone experiences and interacts with digital content in their own way. What works for one might not work for another, so it's important to accommodate different user preferences. So ensure that the site is responsive and adaptive. Should users try to modify the presentation, they shouldn't be excluded from accessing the content. However, and I'm saying this again, it is important to be accessible and usable by default, which forms the basis of universal design, providing the best for everyone as the baseline. And finally, keep learning more and spreading awareness. So before we move into the questions, I have one for you. So now that you know a bit more about neurodiversity, what could you or your organization do to better accommodate neurodivergent individuals? You can pop your answers in the chat and mute yourself. No pressure though. If you're comfortable sharing, feel free to do so. And in the meantime, we'll also take in questions if you have any.
While we're waiting on questions, folks, it might be worthwhile mentioning the next webinar in the series as well, folks. So we've got a few webinars coming up on accessibility. So we've got the first one, Persona Power, which will be hosted on May the 9th. The next one will be Accessible Documents on July the 4th. And we've then finally got the Decoding VPAT and ACRs on the 1st of August as well. So that will conclude the four webinars in this series. Further to that, we've also got a few training courses coming up in accessibility as well. And if you follow the QR code here, this will direct you to all of the training and events that we have available at UserVision. And this also includes our UX division of the team as well. Mark, thank you for joining. Mark, I had the pleasure of meeting Mark earlier, who shared with me a story of a book that he's been working on with his daughter in open dyslexic font, which is absolutely amazing to see. It's a real. I can't wait to buy it for my kids as well. So, thank you for sharing that, Mark. Do we have any other questions in the chat at all, folks? Okay, well, if there's no questions, folks, then I think we can conclude. We'll get 9 minutes back per day. Thank you, everyone, so much. Thank you so much, Snigdha,
We just have a question from Arthur.
You have a question from Arthur? Is that in the Q&A? I apologize. Arthur, what's your question? Let's have a look.
So on an earlier slide, we showed an example of timeout for buying tickets. What would have been a suitable solution to consider?
So there are exceptions to this WCAG success criteria. So if it's for things like auctions, eBay, for example, there's no way around it. For an online auction, you kind of have to provide a time limit. What we can do is offer users extended time periods. So giving them a warning in advance that they're going to be timed out of their session is the best way to overcome this situation. So yeah, as I say, the WCAG success criteria it does allow for certain instances, but generally speaking, the best way to overcome that is to give enough warning and give the user enough time to actually complete their task. Only jumping between the Q&A and the chat there, so apologies, Arthur, I missed that one. Any other final questions, folks? Okay. Well, finally, thanks again so much for everyone's time today, and we really look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. If you have any questions following on from today's webinar, please do get in touch. You can get in touch via the hello@ email address on the final screen there, hello@uservision.co.uk. You can also contact myself or Snigdha directly. That's just keith@uservision.co.uk or snigdha@uservision.co.uk. And I think that's absolutely everything. Thanks everyone so much for your time. And oh, one final thing, we are going to be sharing the recording of this. So if you did miss any of the bits at the beginning, then we will you'll have the option to catch up on that again at a later date.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody.